All right, you are live, Nick. Thank you
All
so much
right.
for joining us and, telling us about life lessons that we can learn from Pokemon. So I will let you take it away.
All right. Sorry, I was hearing myself, and that is a problem, and that is resolved. And we are short on time, so I am going to keep this train a rolling. Let me just boot everything up for us here. There we go. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Nick, and today I'm going to walk you through some life lessons from Pokemon. I cannot guarantee that the rest of the presentation is as fancy as this bit. Alternate title might end up being Pokemon Lessons from Life. You decide. I'm going to be moving at a pretty quick pace because there are so many life lessons. I had to cut down a bunch of them, surprisingly, and I want to give some background on a bunch of things. But before we get into anything, a couple ground rules. I mean, it's a really short list, which is basically I'm going to be covering Generation 1 of Pokemon. That's not because it's the best or anything. It's because it has some weird, interesting little quirks, and I think that lays itself nicely to some life lessons. So no, type systems that make sense. There's over 1,000 Pokemon. I cannot keep up with that. There's too many. There's too many Pokemon. Also, some of these are going to be a huge stretch. You're going to be like, Nick, you just made that up. That's you're just doing this for the purpose of a slide. And in which case, I just say to you,
don't worry about it. It's fine.
Yeah. Sometimes there's a lesson that came from Pokemon, and other times there was something in Pokemon, and it can be a life lesson. And we're going to find out which one's which. And again, that's kind of up to you. I'm going to start with probably the easiest lesson to go through, which is that the choices that you make in life matter. But not as much as you might think. So let's start with the world of Pokemon. So in Pokemon, the choices that you make matter. You get to choose between, in the first generation, Bulbasaur, a grass type, Charmander, a fire type, or Squirtle, a water type. And the choice matters in the sense that there are a bunch of gyms in the game that you have to complete. And the first three gyms are easier or harder, depending on who you pick. If you pick Bulbasaur, the first three gyms are, pretty good. The types work out pretty well. If you pick Squirtle, not quite as good. The electric gym's probably going to kick your butt. If you pick Charmander, fire type, you're probably going to have a bad time, or at least a little bit. And also, the choices of Pokemon that you can find, that you can fight, that you can catch, is also limited until later on in the game when things open up. Much like in life, our early choices are limited, but things kind of branch out later on in life. These decisions matter, but at the end of the game, Charmander, Squirtle, Bulbasaur probably might not even be in your team. And you can catch more and more cooler, better, possibly, Pokemon. And in real life, we worry a lot about making the right choice in terms of, did I go to the right school? Did I study the right thing? Did I take the right job? Those things definitely impact our lives, but they aren't the end-all, be-all. Hashtag anxiety, yeah. There are a whole bunch of examples of people who started late in life or otherwise might not have gotten where they expected on the path that they expected. So up here, I don't know how well folks can see, but there's some examples of some famous people. Alan Rickman, an actor, wasn't in any film roles until he was 28. I think Samuel L. Jackson wasn't in a film role until he was 45. Martha Stewart, famous home decorator / criminal, I guess, wasn't decorating homes until she was 35. Vera Wang, wedding dress maker, designer, wasn't until she was 39 that she actually designed a wedding dress. And you'd be like, Nick, those are famous people. I'm not famous. How, that doesn't count. Stop telling me this nonsense. And I'd be like, okay, you're right. That's fair. So I'm also going to put this Sylveon down. It's going to fall off my shoulder anyway. Well, what if I told you maybe you could listen to a neuroscientist instead of me? And there's a neuroscientist out there that's come up with this idea that it takes 7 years to master something. And so there's this popular webcomics Saturday morning breakfast serial that I came across this idea. And it's if you live to be 88 years old, then after 11, you have 11 opportunities to create something great. Or to create anything, really. And in your life, that means the things that you do in your 20s and your 30s, those are important. They set a foundation for things, but they don't determine your entire life path. You have lots of opportunities. You have like 9 or 8 or some other number of other chances to do something that's really cool. And so a lot of things that happen later in your life trump the earlier experiences in your life. The choices that you make matter, but not as much as you might think. So like, don't worry about it. It's fine. Let's move on to lesson number 2, which is everyone experiences the world differently. A lot of these are not going to be mind-blowing, but they're fun to talk about. In the world of Pokemon, there are 151 species. There's a bunch of stats, a bunch of types. There's huge amounts of variation. You know, you got to know about your different types. Grass, fire, ground, flame, electric, water, rock, flying, ice, normal, bug, ghost, fighting, and dragon. And we can't forget about psychic. And when we talk about all these types in the Pokemon world, there's a huge amount of diversity. There's a huge amount of way that these different types and like weaknesses and strengths interact. Okay, that's in the Pokemon world. In our world, we have people that live across more than 190 different countries, speaking over 7,000 languages, people who identify with different genders, ethnicity, class, sexuality, religion, disabilities, and a bunch of other variations. That's too many men, too many people making too many problems, and maybe not enough love to go around. Or suffice to say, there is a lot of opportunity for type clashes. Like there's not, people don't have types, Pokemon have types, but like there's a lot of opportunity for people to experience the world in very different, contradictory ways. One way that we can kind of understand that better about how people experience the world differently is through the idea of intersectionality. Intersectionality is just a way of looking at our experiences through different lenses, not through one perspective, but multiple. So for example, if we're looking at Pokemon, forget about the real world for a second, we can use the concept in Pokemon. We have different Pokemon here. We have Pidgey, which is a flying type, Golbat, which is a flying and poison type. We have Nidoran, male and female, which are just poison types. And, if we only considered, like, we're going to fight a Golbat, and it's like, okay, it's just a poison type. Don't worry about it. That's great, but there might be other strengths and weaknesses that we're missing out on. For example, maybe there's something we could do if we knew it was a flying type. I happen to know that it's both, but you might not. Similarly, I'm relatively able-bodied. I'm a 30-something person. If people made assumptions based on like one attribute or other attributes, they may not know about other experiences in my life, and it might bias them in a particular way because we don't know the ways that people explore and experience the world differently. I am going to keep moving at a brisk pace and take us on to our third lesson in 7 minutes. I think I'm on time. Growth looks different for everyone. Pokemon, it's super easy. There's like 3 ways in Generation 1 that Pokemon can evolve, can grow specifically. Sorry, they can evolve in a couple different ways. They can grow in terms of experience. Literally, when you battle a Pokemon, you gain experience. That improves their stats and can cause evolution, like our Poliwag to Poliwhirl or not Graveler, Geodude to Graveler. Items can also help Pokemon to grow. It can improve their stats. You can use it to teach moves, or we can use items to cause evolution. I'm looking at you, Eevee, evolving into like 7 different types, but only 3 in the first one. We can also grow Pokemon via trading. Trading has 2 effects. One is, for all Pokemon, it increases the rate at which they gain experience. And also for some Pokemon, like Golem over here, is how they evolve. And people aren't really all that different in that sense. Like Pokemon, we kind of evolve in 3 different ways. I'm really gonna stretch this one out. So experience, this is how most people grow. You live, you try things, you succeed, you fail, and it's like a slow, steady-ish kind of progress. People also grow through the use of items. I don't mean like taking drugs and things like that necessarily, although that may be required. I mean things like getting new gear. Sometimes you kind of plateau, you reach a limit, and maybe you need something to help you get along. Maybe you need to take an art class or get some education or something to that effect. Please tell me eating candy counts. I cannot say that in good conscience. Other ways humans grow, and this is really a stretch, trading. We don't trade humans. But if you think of trading as moving from one environment to another environment, that is something that people can use to grow in a lot of different ways. Maybe you're in an environment that doesn't nurture you, that is toxic or otherwise is just stifling. That could trading or moving or changing your environment could mean moving to a new job, moving to a different city, maybe getting out of a bad relationship. All of these ways are ways that humans grow, like Pokemon, kind of, sort of. A big difference, though, between humans and Pokemon in terms of growth is that Pokemon growth is kind of like the one on the left. It's really straightforward. They grow. That's it. It's more complicated than that, but you grow. Humans are way messier in terms of how they grow. And I don't mean physically. I mean just like in terms of how you experience success and all that. Sometimes you do better, and then you get worse, and then you get better, and then you get worse. And then who knows what is going on in your life. It's way messier. Growth is way messier. Lesson number 4, you can't do it alone. I mean, this is technically a lie. You can absolutely do whatever you like to do alone. You can do that. I wouldn't recommend it, and we'll get to why you might not want to do that. We'll start with Pokemon, though. In Pokemon, the catchphrase is gotta catch 'em all. And so let's just assume that's the only part you care about in Pokemon, which there's a lot more to that game. Bad news, regardless of what generation of the game, there's always version exclusives of the game. So if you take a look here, this is from the first generation. Anything in red is from the red version only, and the blue is from the blue version only, and the gray is ones that you have to trade, which means you need not only 2 copies of a game, but also 2 Game Boys and a link cable and a bunch of other stuff. So let's say you wanted to do it alone, and you wanted to complete the Pokedex. You can't. You just can't. You need help from somebody, even if that somebody is alternate universe you. But also in the world of Pokemon, let's say you wanted to go it alone by just having one man, one Pokemon against the world, against 8 gym leaders, against 4 of the Elite 4 and the champion. Translation, you need a lot of money to achieve Gen 1. Yeah. Or friends. Friends are easier. If you wanted to do this on your own, you absolutely could. It would be arduous. There are probably challenge runs where people do this. But again, it'd be really hard. Is that the kind of life you want to live? I don't know. But that's fine, because we're going to talk about real life. Intrinsically, I think it makes sense. You don't want to do things alone, or at least not all of the hard stuff. But let's suppose you're not convinced. Let's bring some science or study or whatever into the process. In 2021, a study was conducted around cost and productivity with tasks and task complexity. So they had teams and they had individuals doing both simple things and complex things. And what they learned from that study was that if you're doing something simple, doing things on your own, no problem. That's actually the way to be the most productive. But as soon as things start getting even slightly complex, teams vastly outpace them. The team is at least as fast as the fastest person on the team, and they manage to do things more efficiently. So I'm going to harp on this some more about teams and people and friends and the power of friendship. We're not talking about the anime, we're just talking about the game, but there's still a lot of the power of friendship. Lesson number 5, surround yourself with different supportive people. I'm going to briefly go on a tirade about gym leaders. Gym leaders do not surround themselves with different supportive people. They surround themselves with the same people. They are monotyped, monocultured. Like, looking at you, Brock, with your Geodude and your Onix, your rock types, you're going to get wrecked by me and my water and or grass types. They're chumps because they don't have different groups of people with them. That's why you, as a player of the game, typically have a team of different Pokemon that you use, because having different strengths and weaknesses makes you stronger, makes you better. Not going to continue that Daft Punk reference. This just seems like good advice in real life, too. I mean, like, if you had to pick a group of friends, like, you know, Brock, Misty, Blue, I think his name is, not Ash, with different voices, hopefully supportive, or Gary, older Gary, and champion Gary, which do you think would be better for you as a person? Which do you think would work out better? It's probably this group, because also you get Psyduck, and Psyduck is great. Having different supportive people in your life means having folks who can keep you honest, people who can challenge you, people who are there to share in your successes and failures, people who can present different points of view to kind of make you consider or help you to consider other perspectives. And like, that's why this Team Gary is not going to help you. Don't worry about it. All right, just because.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah. If that wasn't enough, if you weren't convinced, I'm going to do this for pretty much every lesson. I tried to find science to back up most of these things, or at least something that might convince you. You might have heard from a famous motivational speaker that you are the average of the 5 people closest to you. It turns out that that's technically true, but not in the way you think. Not because it's not the people closest to you, but it's because all of our environment, and I think more broadly, there's the expression, our environment shapes who we are. And so in that sense, if you surround yourself with kind, supportive people, you're probably more likely to be kind and supportive. If you surround yourself with a bunch of jerks, I'm sorry. Or, I mean, try to get out of that situation. Also, there was a study conducted by Gartner, which is a really business kind of place. And they found that teams that are more diverse, that have different people from different backgrounds, ethnicities, etc., performed 30% better than more monocultural organizations. Also a bunch of stuff about profitability. We are people, not companies, so we don't have to worry about that. Oh man, okay, I can actually slow down a bit. It's not what you have, it's how you use it. So that was Chansey using minimize, and that's because what I remember in Gen 1 is that Chansey would use that and basically would not get hit, because evasion was like bonkers in the first generation. An easy example in the world of Pokemon is, let's say you're fighting Mewtwo, arguably the most powerful Pokemon that you can find in the world of Red and Blue, not counting Mew. I think it's technically the same strength. Doesn't matter. Pokemon in the game of Pokemon do not use what they have effectively. The strategy that the AI will use when it's fighting you, if it's a wild Pokemon, is pick a move randomly. It doesn't matter if it's effective, it doesn't matter if it's damaging, it will just pick one at random. So Mewtwo, brain the size of a planet, will just, I don't know, use Defense Curl or something. I don't remember what its moveset is. And similarly, even with the AI for trainers, they also don't do things that are super bright. They're smarter. They will use super effective moves against you, which is like, that's a good idea. But they'll use super effective moves even if they don't do anything. If you are a bird, flying type, bird is not a type. If you're a flying type and they have a rock type and they have Defense Curl, they'll just keep using Defense Curl even though it's never going to damage you. You got to use what you have effectively if you want to succeed. Kind of related to the idea of it's not what you have, it's how you use it. Did you know that, in a meta point, Red and Blue, those games were made to fit inside a Game Boy cartridge? Gold and Silver, which includes a new region, Johto, but also all of Kanto, that is the entire region of Red and Blue, also fits on a single cartridge, even though they didn't think they could fit anything else the first time. We squeezed in the last bit. That's how Mew got. They removed the debugging tools, and that's how Mew got into the game. No, they managed to fit an entire other game in that game. There was more game in that game because they found out how to use the technology more effectively using science, well, math technically. In real life, this plays out in a lot of different ways. For example, a lot of folks can be discouraged because they do not have the best sort of things. You don't have the best camera, you don't have the best microphone, you don't have the best drawing tablet, computer, whatever. And so as a result, you don't do anything. You don't use it at all. And as it turns out, maybe that doesn't matter. There's a lot of situations where you can do really effective work, really cool stuff, even not having the best material, equipment, etc. There are tons of people that film mind-blowing videos just using their phone, not even with a stabilizer or anything, not even a fancy DSLR, just with their phone. It's just wild. That's not to say that tools and things can't make things easier or better. just that they don't. Why does it look like my camera stopped working?
You're
We'll figure that out. Homestar Runner started out with Mario Paint. That's a great example. Also, maybe let's throw some science into the mix again. A 2020 study, as well as a bunch of other psychology research over the last decade, has shown that experiential purchases, and this is a bit of a stretch, bring more happiness than possessions. So, as an example, like that means like, oh, I could buy some stuff to make me happy. Don't do that. It doesn't. First of all, it doesn't work. It's very short-lived. But it turns out if you like paid for like a movie, an escape room, something like that, you would be happier. That's not exactly. It's not what you have. It's how you use it. But it's kind of close. And so I think it's good to bring that up. Rags. My real world example is Dan making those amazing early years FMVs with Vegas. I mean, tons of people started making FMVs or like music videos, AMVs, using like Windows Movie Maker. That is not fancy. You can make tons of really cool stuff using free software. If you're video editing, I think DaVinci Resolve is free. You don't need to pay $100 a month for Adobe. But this is not a panel about making stuff. It's a panel about life lessons. Not very effective is still effective. I mean this in two different ways. The most obvious one is that in Pokemon, moves can be super effective, which is generally like twice as effective, or not effective, which means it doesn't deal any sort of damage at all. Confusingly, adding to this, in the first generation, the message that you saw when you used an attack didn't actually indicate if a move was effective or not. It had a bug, and so you could use a move that was super effective, and it was like, that wasn't very effective. And you're like, what? I used a water against a fire. Anyway, so in one sense, sometimes we can be doing things that are actually really effective. They're really good for us, really good for others, but it doesn't feel that way. And that's why this lesson is kind of useful. But also in the other sense for Pokemon, even if you use a move that's not very effective, it still probably deals damage. And you got to think about what you're doing in the context of the broader goal. In Pokemon, your goal is to, for lack of a better word, webcam stopped working. I'll spend like 2 seconds trying to figure that out. And then, it turned off. I don't know, there it goes. Don't know why it turned off. I'm back, baby. Sorry, not very effective. But it turns out you're still your goal in Pokemon is to beat other Pokemon. Let's be honest. Maybe it's to catch Pokemon, but to do that, you got to beat them. And so even if you're just chipping away at their HP, it's still doing something. It's still moving you towards your goal. There we go. Life isn't so different from that. Sometimes not very effective can be vastly effective. There's this idea called the power of tiny gains, which is just math. It's just straight up math. But it kind of illustrates the idea whether or not it's 100% true. The idea is that, let's say you get 1% better every day. If you do the math, that means over the course of a year, that's almost 40 times better at whatever you're doing than if you did nothing. In fact, it's almost like 4,000. It's almost 1,000 times better than if you got 1% worse every day. And so that's just wild, first of all. Like, because often it's like, if I can't do the best thing, I shouldn't do it at all. No, if you can do a little bit, even if it's like, if you're trying to write a story and you write like 3 words a day, at the end of the year, you'll be further ahead than if you just didn't do anything, because math. Sometimes not very effective in your life might mean, and this is especially true in the case of depression or just feeling down, doing something that's not very effective, the not best thing, might be taking a shower. It might be going for a walk. Just some sort of small thing to get you out of a funk. Because it turns out that those small efforts build up into larger things that support our overall goals. Sometimes the thing that we can do, even if it's not very effective, is make the best of a bad situation until we're in a spot where we can make better choices, or we can make the like super effective moves. Doesn't need to be yeah, exactly. That I did not follow that advice when I made this panel. I tried to make it perfect, and it cost me. So, but that's okay. If we're talking about mistakes that I made or advice that I should follow and don't, I'm going to move right on into the next life lesson, which is celebrate your wins. Uh, in video games, it's super easy for this to happen, partly because the game is doing all of the work for you. Um, in Pokemon, you fight Pokemon. When you fight Pokemon, you win battles. When you win a battle, it's like, "Brr, brr, brr, brr." Actually, that's more of the level up sound, but you win, and it's like, hey, you did it. Um, there's usually a little dialogue. You get money. Money can be exchanged for goods and services. So there's that. You also gain experience, and experience can level up your Pokemon. Leveling up your Pokemon can teach it new moves. It can also cause it to evolve. Winning battles gives you badges. Badges let you tame a higher level Pokemon and let you do things out in the overworld. And if that wasn't enough, you also get entered into the Hall of Fame when you beat the Elite Four, or rather, when you beat the champion of the Elite Four. Like, this game is just piling and piling and piling small wins because any individual battle doesn't really matter. In real life, we don't always have the same wins to celebrate. Yeah, some days maybe you start a new job and it's a huge improvement, or you get a promotion, you move to a new city, you make a new friend, you find a romantic partner. That's great. Our wins are not always that big. For me, a win might be like, oh man, I did laundry today. I did dishes today. I worked on something that I wanted to work on. I actually made time for it. Got I got home in the rain and didn't have a breakdown. Yes, exactly. Like, these seem like small things, but it turns out there's a very good reason why we should celebrate these things, and why I, in particular, should celebrate these things. It turns out that celebrating small wins releases dopamine in your brain, and if you can't remember what the difference between dopamine, endorphins, and the other two are, serotonin, it doesn't matter. It turns out that dopamine that dopamine activation or whatever reinforces whatever experience you just had, and your sense of connection with what you did. It is a huge part in your brain's motivation and reward system. So when you complete something, your brain's like, oh yeah, that was good, we should do more of that. And when you start to do that, when you celebrate those small wins, they're not just small wins, they start to roll up into bigger wins and bigger wins, because also dopamine is responsible for addictions, which is why I can say it's kind of like an addiction where you're like, yeah, gotta finish these things. It's really satisfying. It's really rewarding. Which is why you should celebrate your wins. Do you do it? I don't know. I need to work on that. Some of you might have seen this quote before. It's got to be written by like Gandhi or Einstein or something, right? I'm sure there's a bunch of people who actually know where this is from. I see now that the circumstances of one's birth are irrelevant. It is what you do with the gift of life that determines who you are. Yeah, of course, people know. It's not some person. It's Mewtwo. It's in the Pokemon movie. It's like this big, deep line, and it's Mewtwo. I mean, it's just fascinating, really. But that's kind of just like foreshadowing the idea of ability is more than skill. It's both. It's both of those things. That's not in the remake. Oh, that is sad. That is unfortunate. If you play a lot of Pokemon, you might have heard about this idea of initial values, IVs, and effort values, EVs. And to be completely honest, if you've heard about those things before, you probably already know significantly more about Pokemon than I do. In which case, kudos. That's not the point here. The point is we're going to use those as tools to understand other things about life, about our lives. You can also think of Pokemon as having base stats, like a Mewtwo has a particular set of stats, a Mew has a particular set of stats, and Alakazam has a particular set of stats. Their genetics is effectively their IVs, like maybe one slightly faster or slightly stronger. And their EVs are gained by beating the crap out of other Pokemon, their efforts that they expend. So for Pokemon, their ability is effectively their base stats, a particular species, plus IVs and EVs. Humans, unsurprisingly, are not that different. As a human, we all have approximately the same abilities. We all get an extra skill point at every level. We all get a bonus feat at first level. And our genetics determines some of our ability, but also our training determines a little bit of our ability. Um, the thing where this becomes a life lesson and not just like, yeah, of course, Nick, is that there are folks that think, oh, I could never do that. I could never be good at X or Y because I don't have the genetics. I'm not strong enough, um, or like I couldn't possibly learn this. And I personally don't think that's true. But also, there's some scientific research that might suggest that that is not true. I mean, we can empirically look. Like if you can't lift things, obviously training you can lift more. But there's some psychological ideas that can kind of help shape the idea of talent as well. Admittedly, the research is not shoddy isn't the right word, but debated. It's very contentious. There's two popular things you might have heard of. One is the idea of a growth mindset. It was popularized in a book, Mindset, written by Carol Dweck, a psychologist. It focuses on the idea of framing certain traits that people have as being things that can be developed rather than being fixed. So a fixed mindset might be like, I am stupid. Like I will never learn this. A growth mindset might be more like I not I am stupid. I am learning, so I don't know this. Um, I am not there yet. Rex, this is why I dislike the word talent, prefer the word skill. Well, and that makes a big distinction because you can get good at things just by doing enough practice, which is the second book. There's a book called Outliers, written by Malcolm Gladwell. It popularized the idea of the 10,000 hour rule. Is it correct? Also, I don't know, but just take it on faith for me this time, folks. It says that the key to achieving world-class expertise in any skills to large extent a matter of practicing the correct way for a total of around 10,000 hours. Is that true? I don't know. It shows that there's some evidence. It's been disproven a bit, but the idea being that like you can improve your ability if you work on like you can't do too much with your genetics, but you can improve your training, your skills, etc. That is something that you can do to level up. There's a thing I was going to add, and I cannot remember what it was, so we're not going to worry about it. Lesson number 10. Wow, we are not everyone has the same spoons. For example, right now I have no spoons. See, there's nothing up my short sleeves, nothing like that. And Alakazam has 2 spoons. That's not a super useful life lesson as presented, and that's why I'm not talking about this. This one might be new to you. It might not be. So we'll start with Pokemon to get this analogy rolling. Pokemon have moves. Moves have power points. Typically, stronger moves like Hyper Beam have less power points in terms of their capacity. And less powerful moves like Confusion have more power points. My spoon is too big. When a move is out of PP, it can't be used at all. Not until you go to a Pokemon Center, not until you use an item to like replenish those power points. If you imagine for a moment that power points are literal spoons, so right now Alakazam has 2 spoons, good for it. No other, I guess Kadabra has a single spoon. No one else has spoons. Then it's like trivial to say, yeah, okay, not every Pokemon has the same number of spoons, but like Nick, I don't get it. Where are you going with this? Spell slots. I was going to get to, okay. People are on board. We're going to get to that in a second. So there's a story. It originates from a woman, Christine Miserando, called Spoon Theory, that talks about living with chronic illness. So if you've ever heard the expression, I don't have any spoons left today, we can thank that. And it's a good read, but it's a long read and much longer than I have time to describe. So I'm going to like condense it. But as mentioned in the chat, the other another way to look at it is spell slots. But the idea is you have every day, you start with a certain amount of spoons or spell slots. Over the course of the day, different things that you do use different amounts of spoons or spell slots. Some things that you want to do, like laundry, might use more spoons. Other items, like playing video games, I could play video games for days, take significantly less spoons. And also, maybe you ran out of spoons today. Well, you could take spoons from tomorrow, but then tomorrow you'll start with less spoons. That's where it diverges from spell slots. So that's like a helpful way at looking at that. But in addition to that, there's a lot of scientific research into the idea of ego depletion. Generally, that willpower and self control are a limited resource. They follow the same idea. There's a little bit of debate around that because there's some research that suggests that willpower is like a muscle and it can be trained. The jury is kind of out on that, but intuitively, you can just think of it. There are some activities that kind of like get people revved up, get them energized, and there's other activities that kind of cause them to like sulk and go away. It's dopamine. Um, and so, really, this lesson is about keeping in mind that not everyone is starting with the same number of spoons, and not everyone is going to be able to use those spoons in the same way. You might think, oh, just come on over, we'll have a good time, we'll just hang out. That could be a marathon for someone else, and you don't know that. So, just got to keep things into perspective. All right. Some things are hard to forget. Yeah, that makes sense, Nick. Thanks for the life lesson. This life lesson's going to go in a direction that you might not expect. I don't know. Maybe you can see it coming. I don't know how clairvoyant people are. In the first generation of Pokemon, there was no way to forget a move. Not technically. As a Pokemon leveled up, it would learn moves. Those moves could replace existing moves. If you got a TM, you could learn a new move. If you were ever like, oh, I'm done with this, you just couldn't get rid of it. There were some shenanigans you do, but you couldn't get rid of it. Even worse, if you had a Pokemon that learned a hidden move, like Cut or Fly or something like that, that move was just stuck there forever. You couldn't even overwrite it with a TM or learning a new move. The game would be like, no, you cannot do that. There's no explicit way to forget a move. In fact, people would keep whole Pokemon whose entire job was to just have HMs on them, which is awful, terrible. And I'm glad we are out of these dark ages of Pokemon. It has gotten a lot better. Okay, hopefully everybody's on board so far. Humans don't have moves. I mean, they kind of do, but like we're not limited to 4. We can do a lot more than that. We do have memories. Some memories are hard to forget in a good way. Maybe like meeting someone for the first time, or I don't know, getting married, or getting a pet, winning a game. I didn't have these examples prepared. There's some things that we can't forget and that are good things, which is fine. But there's also some things that we can't forget that are, for lack of a better word, bad things, or things that are hard, painful, stressful, things like trauma and grief. And in this sense, they're kind of like the TMs or HMs. They're really hard to forget and actually are probably way worse because they cause psychological and physiological effects. But that's not what I'm here to explain in terms of things being hard to forget. No, I'm going to give you an example of this. Not in Pokemon. In real life, especially when we're talking about trauma or grief, there's a really interesting metaphor for this sort of experience of things that we can't forget and the pain that they cause, called the ball in the box. And here we have an electrode representing the ball. You get the idea. The idea is that there is a box with a ball in it. And at the beginning of this, the ball is pretty much the exact same size as the box. It's kind of butting around, it kind of bounces around, but it's basically the same size. There's also a big pain button. And I don't mean it's like, oh, physical pain, although that can be kind of part of it. The pain button is like the traumatic, like remembering the traumatic event, remembering the grief, remembering the loss, going through those feelings. And so when in this situation, like when you're grieving, the ball bounces around and you have these feelings that well up that you can't deal with because it's the ball is so big. The button is getting hit constantly, and it's bad. It hurts. It's painful. It's hard to avoid. But over time, and with things like therapy, finding ways to cope, the ball gets smaller. It's still bouncing around inside that box, but it's hitting the button less often. It's hitting the button less hard. Still causing pain, not so painful. Eventually, maybe, depending on what happened, the ball might be so small that it is almost like it's gone, that it's just a distant memory. It's not something that you can entirely forget. Oh, sorry, that's not important. It's not something you can entirely forget, but it's mostly gone. You never really forget it though. Regs, this one helps me out so much. Learning this after my mom's passing really helped me through it. Yeah, when I was going through therapy, going through like my divorce, it was just like, wow, this is extremely helpful in making this situation more manageable. But it makes sense. And also tying things to the broader theme of empathy, like you don't know if somebody's got a ball in a box. You don't know how big that ball is. So think about how you approach others. Um, Lesson number 12, what doesn't kill you makes you weaker. This one should be apparent. If not, oh, I've got some fun stuff for you. In Pokemon, this is really straightforward. Literally, or almost any move in the game makes that you use against a Pokemon makes you weaker, right? If a move hits you, it probably deals HP damage. You lose damage. You get weaker. You could use a move that lowers their defense, attack, etc. You get weaker. Um, Also, in the sense of the game, some moves inflict status effects, which obviously make you weaker. A burn deals damage. Being frozen means you can't move. It does damage even if it doesn't knock you out. Yeah. It makes you weaker. It's not good. That's the point of the game, but that's how it goes. But also, and I feel sad because it wasn't until this point, like 20 years after Pokemon, 30, almost 30 years after Pokemon came out, that I learned that certain status effects have other effects. For example, a Pokemon that's paralyzed has their speed lowered a lot, which I was like, oh, that I think this is happening, but I had no idea. Or more importantly, or a better example rather, is that when a Pokemon gets burnt, it has their attack damage, and I'm like, what? So those are like even more examples in Pokemon of what not killing you making you weaker. Or my favorite example of is toxic, or rather bad poison, which you're like, yeah, poison deals damage, but toxic in particular, or bad poison, which I think is only caused by toxic and one other move, deals some damage over time, a fixed amount, but then that damage gets bigger and bigger and bigger. I never knew that as a kid, but learned it. Yeah, it probably teaches you in the most recent game, but I haven't gone through the lessons in Scarlet and Violet yet, so don't criticize me for that. Let's talk about examples in real life. So we have up here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but we've got Aerodactyl, which is bones. We have Mr. Mime, which is skin. I couldn't think of anything else. We got coughing, which is poison radiation. And we have Hypno, which is, I'm going to go with trauma because, sorry, Hypno's kind of creepy. Almost anything in real life that doesn't kill us makes us weaker. Not necessarily in a dramatically weaker sense, but in a like we're not better for it. Bones, the bones must heal stronger, right? Yeah, no. It turns out that the part where the bone, first of all, bone healing is complicated, but second of all, where the bone heals, that part gets stronger. That's true. But it does that at the cost of decalcifying other parts of your bone. It's just taking the bone and leaching the minerals elsewhere. So no, breaking bones do not come back stronger. Skin, what about that? When it gets cut, is it stronger? Yeah, that's like the one example. Scar tissue is stronger than regular tissue. So kudos, you got that one figured out. Poison, radiation, all that stuff. No, it does not make you stronger. Do not take iocane powder every day. It will not help you out in your mind game with the Sicilian. It is, no, just don't. What about trauma? Unsurprisingly to maybe no one, research shows that traumatized children are more likely to be traumatized again. What a concept. In addition to that research is mostly true for adults as well. So just try not to traumatize people. What about things like the flu or COVID? I got that once. I'm obviously stronger for it. Yeah. No, just wear a mask. Don't even. It's not good. Not to mention with any of these things, even if they did somehow make you stronger, usually there's some sort of rehabilitation period. So if you break a bone, you're like, oh, my bone got stronger, which is not true. You have to spend all this time like learning how to walk again. And that can take a really long time. So even though the lesson here is what doesn't kill you makes you weaker, maybe it's just don't get hurt. Still have a cough 3 months after. Yeah. Some of these things we can't avoid, but this is why taking precautions is important. Not mentioned concussions. Cubone probably has a concussion. I think it knows headbutt. Take life at your own pace. Most Pokemon games are pretty linear. In a way, you start the game, you can only really follow one path. Maybe there's a couple branches, but you ultimately have to go in one particular direction, at least until your movement options kind of open up. That doesn't mean you have to like take things at the game's pace. You can make up your own way of enjoying it. You're like, oh, I'm going to get to this level for my Pokemon before I fight. I'm going to talk to these NPCs. I'm going to have these people in my party. Yeah, yeah, technically you can do that. That's kind of boring. That's just playing the game. Talking in a little bit more of an interesting way, you can also try things like Nuzlocke runs. Nuzlocke runs, to those who don't know, are a different way of playing the game where you impose rules on yourself that dictate how you will play Pokemon, not in the way that it's designed, but in a more fun way. So the basic rules, and there's tons of variations, are when a Pokemon faints, it must be released or put in a box. It is like it died. So it kind of changes. You're like, oh, I really have to care about this Pokemon because if I don't get it healed, like it's dead and it's gone forever, and then I have to grieve it, and then I have to deal with the ball in the box. Not exactly, because they're Pokemon, and sorry, it doesn't matter. The other rule being only the first wild Pokemon encountered in a route or area can be caught. That means if you accidentally knock it out, it's just like yours. It's dead. If it flees, it's gone. And that means if you didn't catch something in that area, too bad. So good luck trying to get Dratini. That is going to be a hard time for you. Can't Nuzlocke get too attached. Well, speaking of which, the third rule being you must nickname every Pokemon. That's probably the least stringent. In the most recent game, I had a lot of fun. I think the best name I've ever had for a Pokemon is Tony Stork. I don't know if I can top that. But yeah, those are the rules for Nuzlocke. There are tons of other variations. In real life, I'm going to let everyone in on a secret. Because in real life, taking life at your own pace, I don't know about you as a person because I'm talking to the internet, but you're probably an adult. And if you're an adult, this applies to you. If you're a kid, you've got some time before this happens. You're an adult. You can decide what's fun for you, the kinds of relationships that you want to have with people, how close or not close you are. You're like, oh, I have to be close with my family. You don't. Maybe there was a traumatic event with your family. You don't have to be close to them. You can choose to be close to them one way or another, but you don't have to be. You don't have to, like, there's so many decisions in life that you can make that you can do your own way. You don't have to do things because other people are like, this is the way we do things. If you want to just have a room filled with plushies in your house, like this lovely Sylveon, you can do that. No one's going to stop you. No one's going to come knock down your door and stop you. If you want to walk around and cosplay all day, like, one, that is a power move. You have a power that I do not possess. But two, there is no one stopping you. I mean, all of this is modulo a bunch of rules that we follow. Like, if you have a home or you live in an apartment, you got to pay rent. You can't get around that. But like all of the stuff that you have control over, you can decide how you want to live. You don't need to live up to other people's expectations. I mean, Pikachu and Blastoise here definitely don't. Like, is this what a Blastoise looks like? I do not think so. Although I do love chubby Pikachu. He's got little tiny little arms. He really is like an electric rat in this picture. That's true. If your family's toxic, you aren't required to harm yourself. Exactly. But people are like, no, family is really important, and maybe it is, but it doesn't have to be. You can decide you can also decide what kind of relationship you want to have with people. Do you want to be close to them? Do you want to be distant? Do you want to share certain aspects of your life, love, sex, money, um, how what do you want to share with people? That's up to you. You don't have to. You can have non-traditional or non-traditionally, I don't know. Doesn't matter. You get the idea. The last rule, and I'm surprised. I thought I would be behind on this, but I actually have a bunch of time, so I can go a little bit slower. I won't, but we'll go through the last rule. Maybe if we have some time, I can show people about stuff that did get finished. No, we're not going to do that. What the game is defines what the players do. I include this as the last point because one, it's kind of meta, so it kind of encompasses everything that we've talked about. But also it talks about the world that we live in a meta context. What the game is defines what the players do is true of literally every game. It is more true of video games because video games have code that enforces the rules. That's not to say that there's not random cosmic bits that can change things from happening. But for the most part, the game is like static. It's fixed. It doesn't change. And so it's going to enforce the rules very rigidly. But as an example of this in a meaningful way, we're not going to talk about Pokemon at all. We're going to talk about Monopoly. If you've ever played Monopoly, I'm sorry. It is a terrible game. It is not fun. And it basically is barely a game. There's some person who studied it from like a game theory perspective, and like you basically don't have choices. You should buy everything you can, and that's it. That's the whole game. But the point that I'm trying to make about that is often on Monopoly, you're like, oh, Nick is being a big jerk in this game. I am not being a big jerk in this game. The game is designed to make me a big jerk. The game is designed to make me a monopolist and own all of the things. And you might not like that, but that's what the game is about. And if you don't want that, play a better game. In Pokemon, this plays out differently. This is why I wanted to pick Generation 1, because it has so many weird little bugs. In Generation 1 of Pokemon, the Psychic type has 3 weaknesses: Ghost, Bug. Well, actually, later it has Ghost, Bug, and Dark, I think. So in the first gen, it only had Ghost and Bug. Okay, so only 2 weaknesses. Ghost was not effective against Psychic in the first game because of a bug. It was supposed to be, it wasn't. So that means that only Bug was effective against Psychic, right? Okay, so that means Psychic Pokemon were pretty strong. All right, that's fine. Well, okay. Even if Ghost was supposed to work correctly, like then that would be good, right? Well, no, because all of the Ghost Pokemon were also Poison types, which makes Psychic really strong. Okay. What else? Well, there was a special stat, and now we have special attack and special defense, but previously it was 1 stat. Psychic types had a really high special stat, so they were really good at special, which meant Psychic was really powerful. And many other types, even if they weren't strong against Psychic, might have a type that make them weak against Psychic. All of the grass types, except for Tangela, have poison as a subtype, which means that Psychic is really, really good. Oh, I've heard about the badge boost glitch. I haven't read into it. But the thing I'm trying to point out here is like the game defines what the players do. So if Psychic is really powerful in the game and the game is broken and it has bugs and the bugs make Psychic even more powerful, then people are going to play with a lot of Psychic Pokemon. Not only was Mewtwo and Mew very powerful Pokemon in their own right, but because they were Psychic Pokemon in addition to that, people are like, Mewtwo is the best Pokemon ever. And it also has probably led to my long-standing belief that Psychic is the best type, even though that is not true possibly anymore. There are lots of cool. There's no best type, but in first gen it was the best type. In life, rules are not as straightforward. We have lots of formal and informal mores, norms, laws that define what we do in our day-to-day lives. And sometimes we wonder, it's like, why do other people behave badly? And in some cases, maybe it is the individual, but we often are quick to say that this is an individual problem and not look at the problem from the set of rules that we have. So using some examples that you might see or hear about in everyday life, you might see people speeding, and you're like, speeding is illegal. Why do people speed? Well, let's look at the rules. One rule is that the roads that you drive on are typically designed to drive really fast, probably faster than the speed limit. So people drive faster than the speed limit. But also, there are penalties, and you're like, oh, penalties will discourage people, but they aren't enforced very much. And if you don't think you're going to get caught, you're not going to follow the rules. And so the combination of those two things means you don't follow the rules, you speed. In fact, person pointed out to me, it's like you see those signs that are like 120, 130, 140 kilometers an hour, and you're like, what does this tell you? It's like, well, it tells me that I can save $50 if I go 130 instead of 140 or something. And you're like, yeah, I guess that's true. Or it said it was if I'm going to go 120, I may as well go 130. I don't know, something like that. Why do people pollute? Or rather, why do companies pollute? Well, the cost of doing the right thing is often expensive. And the cost of doing the wrong thing is usually a fine. And if you're a company and you want to make money, you'll do the thing that's cheaper, which means that you'll keep paying the fine even though the bad thing keeps happening. Why do billionaires exist? Well, because they have money. They get to keep lots of money. Money gives them power. And then they can use that power to shape the rules, which they'll use to favor themselves. In a nutshell, I'm not a political scientist, but like those are some things that you might see in day-to-day life. And a lot of it is formed by the rules. There's lots of other examples. But the reason that I wanted to bring this up in this talk, because we've been talking a lot about empathy, a lot about how different people experience the world, life lessons of that nature. The reason that I wanted to bring it up is because these systems exist whether we are conscious of them or not. And they affect different people very differently. When these systems cause bad results, cause people to get harmed for no good reason other than by virtue of who they are, we should work to change those and be aware of how we fit into those systems and how we can change those systems. That is why I wanted to bring that up as the last lesson today. But there was one other thing I wanted to talk about, not really talk about, but show off with regard to this lesson. There's two cool interactive graphics that kind of highlight parts of this. One is called The Evolution of Trust, which is at ncase.me/trust. It mostly talks about the prisoner's dilemma, which is a simple game where you pick like ally or betray effectively. And if you allying for both of you is the best result, but betraying is best for either of you. And it turns out that mathematically the result is to be a jerk. But it talks about how if you change the rules of that game, how it changes how people play. So that's really cool. It talks about trust in general. It's short. It's like 30 minutes. There's another one called What We Behold is What We... Wait, is it? We Become What We Behold. And it talks about media and how it influences group behavior. The things that we see end up becoming more of the things that get emulated, all that kind of stuff. It's at ncase.itch.io/WBWWB. It's cool. I am running much shorter on time, but I did it. I got everything done in an hour. So I don't know if people have questions. I don't know if I can answer questions. I don't know how that would work. But if people are looking for me elsewhere on the internet, I'm Enterp on Twitter while it exists, for as long as it exists. You can find me on Twitch at The Race Against Time. I run an annual Chrono Trigger themed charity event called The Race Against Time. And I also make a Chrono Trigger themed audio drama, which I'll be talking about probably tomorrow. I'm talking about making audio drama at zealarchives.com. Is that a Game Boy camera filter? Yes, it sure as heck is. I had to find one that I could upload the picture with, but there's other ones online. I'll post a link in the panel chat afterwards. Yeah, that's what I got for all y'all.
Thank you very much, Nick. That was an amazing panel. Applause in the chat. Yes.
Wait, hold on. I could have done this. There we go.
Oh,
I didn't use that the whole time.
Nice. Yeah. Thank you very much.